20 years ago, we were told it's impossible for a movement for Palestinian rights calling for boycotts, divestment, and targeted sanctions on Israel's regime of oppression to take off. As a statement by the Palestinian BDS National Committee, the largest Palestinian coalition leading the global BDS movement, has said, July 9th, 2005 will be remembered in history as the start of a principled, strategic, and creative process that has isolated Israel's decades-old regime of settler colonialism, apartheid, and military occupation at the grassroots and institutional level. 20 years since, it is fair to say the historic BDS call has indeed inaugurated a movement that counts today among the most influential justice movements globally. Oppressors and their propagandists always tell us it's impossible to aspire for freedom, justice, equality, liberation. Yet with people power, with our collective, principled, creative, and strategic work, we make the impossible possible. In the midst of the most depraved phase of Israel's live-stream genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in the illegally occupied Gaza Strip, when Israel is openly starving, massacring, maiming hundreds of thousands, and overtly planning to erect concentration camps, our unbearable grief makes it awkward to celebrate the 20th anniversary of BDS. Apartheid Israel, enabled and emboldened by the shameless, boundless military, financial, political, and discourse complicity of the US, the European Union, and the UK, is trying to normalize the fundamentally abnormal and to numb our consciences with its relentless savagery. It views the rise to power of its natural allies, far-right, fascist, authoritarian forces in the West and elsewhere, as providing the long-coveted opportunity to finally exterminate the indigenous Palestinian survivors of its ongoing Nakba, not gradually as it has been doing for decades, but in one fell swoop. Eliminating the natives, after all, is a feature, not a bug, in settler colonial history. Yet, our barely containable rage and moral duty compel us to mark this occasion with reflection, critique, a measure of pride, and a whole lot of resolve to carry on no matter what, until the genocide ends and until the regime of oppression that has spawned it is ultimately dismantled. Taking stock of what we have collectively achieved against what seemed like insurmountable obstacles of vilification, intimidation, and horrific repression is about nourishing realistic hope to raise our collective morale. It's about decolonizing our minds from the relentless attempts by Israel and its hegemonic colonial partners in the West to colonize them with powerlessness and despondency. It's also about learning from this long struggle the lessons that will help illuminate our remaining march to freedom. As early as 1923, Zionist leader Ze'ev Jabotinsky wrote with lucid honesty, quote, "Every native population in the world resists colonists as long as it has the slightest hope of being able to rid itself of the danger of being colonized. Zionist colonization," he said, "must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach." End of quote. Aside from its concrete and high-tech walls surrounding Palestinian ghettos, especially Gaza, Israel has incessantly tried to construct an iron wall in our minds by trying to reduce us to human animals, to isolate us from our natural Arab environment and the rest of the world, and to sear into our consciousness through sustained unspeakable violence the imperative of submission to its indomitable power as fate. Born in 2005, inspired by the struggles that ended apartheid in South Africa and Jim Crow in the US, BDS has evolved to become a hopeful, formidable antidote to this induced hopelessness and a beacon of resistance, resilience, and regeneration. BDS is inspired by a century of Palestinian popular resistance, initially against British colonialism and then Zionist settler colonialism in Palestine. It's also inspired by liberation movements, especially the South African, and of course the civil rights movement. In the US, we decided that at a minimum, in order for Palestinians to exercise our inalienable right to self-determination as an indigenous people in our homeland, three rights must be achieved: an end to the military occupation, an end to the system of racial domination, segregation, and apartheid, and the right of refugees to return and receive reparations in accordance with international law. BDS is opposed to all forms of racism: anti-Palestinian racism, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous racism, among others. It is based on international law, but it takes a critical view of it and strives to expand its interpretation beyond the confines initially set by its colonial founders. BDS is led by the broadest Palestinian coalition to ever exist, with representation from within historic Palestine and from exile. Today, it's a worldwide anti-racist nonviolent movement that nuclear-powered Israel considers an existential threat to its regime of colonial oppression. In states undergoing a rise of authoritarianism, even fascism, from the US to Germany, from the UK to Austria, the BDS movement is facing unparalleled challenges. From well-oiled propaganda, racist smearing, and almost unrivaled repression to lawfare, precisely because of the movement's proven effectiveness and, by now, irrefutable impact. From universities finally cutting academic or financial ties with Israel and its complicit universities, to Norway's sovereign fund, the world's largest, divesting from Israel bonds, city councils across the UK and across the world divesting, tens of thousands of artists and over 7,000 writers and publishers endorsing the cultural boycott of Israel, governments in the global south like Colombia enacting actual trade sanctions and military embargoes, or denying port to ships carrying military cargo to Israel, as in Angola and Namibia, from playing a key role in Intel's decision to scrap a $25 billion investment in Israel, to, quote, changing Israel's global trade landscape, end of quote, as admitted by the chairman of the Israel Export Institute. The BDS movement today is a pillar in the struggle for Palestinian liberation. With its massive global network supported by trade unions, look at Unite's latest resolution that is so inspiring. Trade unions, farmers' coalitions, as well as racial, social, gender, and climate justice movements, together representing tens of millions, the BDS movement has radically transformed both the global understanding of the question of Palestine as essentially a liberation struggle by an indigenous people against settler colonialism, and also the ethics of solidarity, setting as its most profound prerequisite the obligation to end complicity first and foremost, to do no harm. If Palestine is really the center of the world today, as Angela Davis has recently said, BDS has become not just the epicenter of the global Palestine solidarity and anti-apartheid movement, but also among the most influential and contagious justice movements worldwide. This is why the establishment in the colonial West, including in the UK, is fighting the BDS and all our partners, especially PSC, with almost unprecedented repression and anti-democratic measures. Why on earth, everyone has a right to ask, should the UK government throw under the bus civic rights, democratic norms, and whatever precious little remains of British credibility globally to enable Israel's genocide, to arm it, to fund it, to allow its companies to profit from it, and to use its propaganda organs, including the criminal factory of genocidal incitement, otherwise known as the BBC, to justify it, sanitize it, and whitewash it? Why? Is it colonial affinity, considering Israel the declining West's latest, most contested, yet most beloved settler colony, planted in the heart of the geostrategically prized Arab region? Is it corruption, including bribing your prime ministers and ministers with summer holidays in Spain, VIP football tickets, or otherwise, or election campaign funding? Is it the establishment's fear of the struggle for Palestinian rights, exposing the rot at its core and galvanizing people power in all justice struggles to radically change the structures of power in order to serve the people and the planet, not the military, tech, financial, and lobby powers? Is it all the above, perhaps? Whatever the reason, Gaza has exposed the deep flaws in your so-called liberal democracy, showing many of your elected officials to be under extraneous influence, to use a British understatement, revealing how your universities are led not by visionaries, but by missionaries of the state and the corporate and lobby powers, exposing how your institutions display a chronic herd mentality, continuing their risk-averse business as usual with a genocidal state and its complicit organs. Do no harm means fighting to end all this horrific complicity in your sphere of relative influence and to offset the harm done to us in your name by your state, your corporations, and your institutions. The British Empire has a legal, not just ethical, responsibility to repair the immense harm it has done to the indigenous people of Palestine over decades. When activists around the world chant in their millions, "Palestine frees us all," they are reflecting on a sense of empowering defiance, of speaking truth to political and corporate power, or what we call strategic radicalism, that the Palestine Solidarity Movement and BDS at its core has inspired among diverse justice movements worldwide, just as the South African anti-apartheid movement had done in the 1980s. An entire young generation today across the world accurately perceives of Gaza as not just a scene of destruction of tens of thousands of Palestinian lives and a 4,000-year-old civilization with unparalleled brutality and impunity at the hands of the US-Israeli genocidal axis, but also simultaneously as emblematic of a dystopian era of might makes right that poses a threat to humanity at large, as fatal as the climate calamity. John Dugard, a prominent South African jurist and former judge ad hoc of the International Court of Justice, years ago wrote that Palestine has become the litmus test for human rights. Today, Palestine is the essential cause that intersectionally animates global outrage at a rigged, oppressive, colonial, and deeply racist order where oligarchs and large multinationals have more power than most states, and where the planet and the global majority are sacrificed at the altar of insatiable greed and lust for yet more power. In this grim picture, the BDS movement is showing how being at once ethical and effective, radical and strategic, can build enough people power to take on, through sustained pressure, including peaceful disruption of business as usual, the nastiest complicit corporations, fossilized university administrations, and hypocritical Western machinations, and win. A few days ago, the United Nations Human Rights Council published a landmark report by UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the OPT, Francesca Albanese, that exposes how complicit corporations underpin the settler colonial twofold logic of displacement and replacement aimed at dispossessing and erasing Palestinians from their lands, as she said. The report urges trade unions, lawyers, civil society, and ordinary citizens to press for boycotts, divestments, sanctions, justice for Palestine, and accountability at international and domestic levels. In his iconic book, Black Skin, White Masks, Frantz Fanon writes, quote, "If the question of practical solidarity with a given past ever arose for me, it did so only to the extent to which I was committed to myself and to my neighbor to fight for all my life and with all my strength so that never again would a people on earth be subjugated," end of quote. To fight subjugation, especially when one's state or institution is implicated in it, the most profound ethical obligation is to end complicity, to do no harm. Nothing else matters as much. Keenly cognizant of this obligation and exceptionally effective in building people power, PSC, with all its hundreds of thousands of supporters, all the major trade unions affiliated to it, along with so many of its partners in the UK civil society, has shown how BDS organizing can actually cut complicity from universities to museums to festivals to city councils, all the way to Westminster. The path is still long and treacherous, but with our collective, undeterred will, our strategic radicalism, we can and shall prevail. Thank you.